Girl, you're facing the wrong way. Come on, don't be camera shy. Feels a bit weird turning her by her neck. Hi guys, so here's my Bridgerton costume analysis. Yes, another one. Now since Bridgerton came out, it seems as if everyone and their insert appropriately funny noun here has been doing a costume analysis video. But is there room for just one more?
Yes.
Yes. Now, just a little disclaimer, these are just my opinions on the show as an English literature graduate using my analytical skills to explain some of the decisions made. So, yeah. On with the review. Finally! So for me, in any film or series, the costume's primary role is to aid in the storytelling of the programme, and if the costumes cease to give us hints about a character before they have even spoken, then this is a job badly done. And in this respect, I think Bridgerton has done a fantastic job. Just to remind you, the series is based on the first of Julia Quinn's 8 novels, which is not exactly highbrow literature. When I was younger, I distinctly remember seeing The Duke and I in my local library, nestled in amongst the Milson and Boon books, recognisable because of this cover. And so when people are criticising the costumes and comparing them to the 2020 film Emma, you have to wonder whether they have actually considered what is being adapted here. Emma firstly was written in the actual Regency period in 1815 and by one of the most canonical writers in the Western world, Jane Austen, who herself was from this high societal background, and so the costume designer Alexandra Byrne has reflected this affluent and highbrow literary writing in the costumes. They're classical and canonical. Now, imagine the same approach being taken with Bridgerton, which includes 10-minute long sex scenes, boxing matches and secret gambling societies for women. It just wouldn't work. The costume designer Ellen Mirojnick seems to use modern influences such as Chanel, with the Regency look being more aspirational. When you look at the work that Ellen has done previously, the kinds of films she is often involved with and her approach is often very theatrical. For example, she has done the costumes for Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, The Greatest Showman and the 1997 version of Cinderella. And I think Bridgerton follows in this theatrical approach. The Featheringtons' outfits with their acidic colour palette and hints at the evil stepmother and stepsisters trope would look amazing on stage. Equally, Lady Danbury's colours remind me of pantomime. She's behind you. But I think this is the whole point. In a way, Julia Quinn's books, and so the Netflix series too, comes as a parody of the Regency period and the strict customs which had to be obeyed. The series has not been dubbed by many as escapism for no reason, and I think this whole pointing out the flaws with customs at the time can in part explain the dreaded corset scenes. Now, we know from many other analysis videos that corsets would not have been tight-laced at this time. Tight-lacing, by the way, is a process of tightening the corset, normally around the waist to reduce the waist size. In the Regency period, women would have worn a corset over a shift or a chemise, but it would not have been super heavily boned as cording was more popular at this point. Making the waist appear tiny wasn't very important as the Empire dresses didn't have an emphasis on the waist anyways, and so I'm going to suggest that the corset scene was included to highlight to a modern day audience the bizarreness of getting all dressed up to go to a number of balls in order to meet your future mate, but also the extremes that women had to go through to be deemed acceptable. While Anthony is off having sexy times with an opera singer, his sister Daphne is left not even knowing how babies are made on the dance floor. And this is a point that we see over and over again. While the Duke can choose to remain a rake and not get married, Daphne is literally making herself bleed for wearing these corsets to retain her image as the diamond of the season. Now, I do think that they could have shown this another way and not have fallen back on the corset stereotype. Plus, as the corsets were made by corsetier Mr. Pearl, they definitely should have been comfortable and not made the actresses bleed. So I'm a bit meh about this part. I'm definitely not excusing them showing those scenes, but just trying to explain why they might have included them. But what I definitely think is more of an issue is how they deal with race in the show. Up until episode 4, Bridgerton seems to have had a totally colourblind casting process, but then in the 4th episode we randomly get this scene between the Duke and Lady Danbury.
We were two separate societies, divided by colour, until a king fell in love with one of us.
And then again, after this episode, the issue of race is never explicitly mentioned again. And in my opinion, they should have either had the show as a great example of colourblind casting like in Hamilton, or they should have given this plotline the significance it deserves. Noelle from Costuming Drama does a really amazing video on this, and specifically the race baiting aspect of it, which I will link below. But in terms of how costumes relate to this, I noticed that at the Trowbridge Ball, which takes place directly after this conversation between Lady Danbury and the Duke, the theme of the costume seems to be black and white, which makes a stark contrast from any of the other balls we see, where the characters wear slightly more bejeweled versions of their daytime attire. Significantly, the ballroom floor is also black and white, like a chessboard, and I couldn't help but wonder whether this had been done deliberately to highlight the diverse London society that they're showing. The checkerboard floor comes up quite a few times after this point, and is even the floor pattern for the Duke's Manor House in Hastings. However, this could just be a coincidence, as when I researched it, the Trowbridge Ball is an actual thing, and the dress code seems to always be black and white, so I don't know. I also think that if they were going to make a point of race in the show, that it would have been a nice touch to include some fabrics within the costumes that were from different cultures. Like, imagine the Queen's character wearing something similar to a Yinka Shonnabar dress. That would have been stunning. They had already started doing that with the hair. Queen Charlotte's 18th century hairstyles were created using braids and threads, and it worked so well. I wish they could have done something similar to this with the costumes. And finally, I want to talk about the ways in which the costumes show character development, and I think this is the most obviously done with Daphne's character. At the beginning of the show, we see her in her family colours, pale blues, which symbolises the blue-bloodedness of the Bridgertons and their pristine heritage. Variations of this shade are all she wears for quite a while, until she and the Duke have their first falling out, and she attempts to win him back by wearing her hair down and wearing the sparkling white gown, signifying her purity as a future bride. Once her and the Duke are married, her colour palette turns decidedly darker, and she even begins wearing purple shades which tie into the overall colour palette of the show, which is purple, so there's like loads of wisteria. This shows the change that she goes through when she comes out. She is getting to grips with her sexuality and so becomes more sultry. I do think this could have been done a little more obviously though, all of their dresses kind of blur into one. The Duke's development is also shown through his costume. At the first ball he attends, he is wearing his signature red jacket, which in colour palette ties him to Lady Danbury, but also makes him stand out compared to the other men who are all dressed in black. But then, once he and Daphne have made their deal, in the very next ball he wears darker colours, blending in once more with the crowd to allow Daphne to shine as the diamond of the season. Lady Danbury even mentions this to him, and I think his veering away from red to darker colours is supposed to show his losing touch of himself, but the red comes back in full force when he and Daphne are first married, and seemingly happy. He wears a red waistcoat along with his red jacket, and I believe that the costume department is trying to hint that now he has found his true self with Daphne. I mean, then it all goes wrong again, but for that brief period of time they seem like the usual honeymooners. The Duke also wears a green pin at his lapel throughout the season, which in another interview Ellen actually explains as having belonged to his mother, which I think is a nice touch. Rightio, I hope you liked that, something a bit different. I know there is a kind of a trend for doing scathing reviews of shows recently, but I really do think that when you consider what Bridgerton actually is as a show, the costumes fit pretty perfectly. And if it had been a show where the costumes took on more of a role, then we would have been paying closer attention to their accuracy, but for the average viewer the costumes were simply to aid the plotline. Yeah, so I hope you liked that. Till next time, au revoir!